I can't keep doing this. My name is Spookydood, and this is my final theory. After the release of Deltarune Chapter 2, the possibilities seemed endless. The story could go in any conceivable direction. And all it took to convince you that a glorified fanfiction was the future of the game was a well-written theory. For any given question, there were several factions within the fanbase that all believed their own thing. It was the age of great discussion. It was fantastic. I had never experienced a fanbase like this. But towards the release of the chapters, the well of conversation topics went dry. But hey, I said, surely this will be fixed after the chapters come out. If you've been following my channel for a while now, you probably know that I've been posting pretty much non-stop since the release. 2 theory reviews, 6 straightforward theory videos, including 1 Woody Theory 2, a video covering everything in the chapter, and a ranking video where I spoke about my opinion on the game. It's been a whirlwind of filming and recording and writing and getting my thoughts out there. However, I actually don't think things are as good as they may have seemed at first, specifically in the theorizing landscape. Chapters 3 and 4 took away that sense of endless possibility that Chapter 2 left us with. The story is being narrowed down, and more our favorite formulaic theories like chess theory are being demolished. Chapters 3 and 4 didn't feel like modular pieces or self-contained adventures like Chapters 1 and 2 did. They felt like parts of a larger story. But without Chapters 5 through 7, and with all the big questions still as mysterious and unsolvable as ever, we're left with very little to discuss or theorize about. I've tried writing several videos over the last week or so. A video on Image Friend's goals, a video on the origin of the prophecy, Lord of the Hammer, and Dragon Blazers, a video on Kris, Des, and Carol, but no matter how hard I tried to follow the threads presented in-game, I'd end up in the same place each time. The big ball of tangled yarn that all these threads lead to. I don't have enough to say to keep making theory after theory after theory, especially when it's nearly impossible to write a self-contained, satisfying theory that doesn't rehash what's already been said or rely too much on assumptions or interpretations. Which is why I'm going to make one more theory. One more theory that tries to tie everything together. That looks to give the best general guess as to where the story is going, what's going to happen with Asgore, the truth behind the group I call the Kris Preservation Society, where the prophecy came from, what Gaster's true goal is, and more. This isn't a theory that ends with one specific idea. This is a theory that tries to give answers, as specific as possible, to every big question, as well as a path forward for the story itself. My name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe, and welcome to my final theory. Now, before we get into it, let me just say a few things. The channel's not going anywhere, nor are my Deltarune videos, actually. I'm not, done talking about Deltarune forever. That's silly. I'm not complaining about how hard it is to come up with an engaging theory at this point. I truly love how dialed in the story has gotten, how fast it feels like Deltarune is hurtling towards its ending. But it has left a bad taste in my mouth when I try to write some big idea, rip-roaring, bright and flashy thumbnail-style video, knowing that the lack of real answers means the video is going to have to be full of filler and assumptions. I love this channel. I really love communicating with you guys and hearing your thoughts, which is why I'd never put out a video like that. For the last few videos, I've been teasing a second channel called Spookyvision. This channel was going to be a sort of variety channel, covering other non-Deltarune games that I like, as well as other stuff I thought would be fun. But with my struggles to write new Deltarune videos, I was left with a hard choice. Do I keep putting out Deltarune content for you guys, knowing it isn't my best work, while separating all my other stuff onto a different channel? Or do I take the ideas I had for that channel, ideas that aren't about Deltarune, but ideas that I'm truly passionate about, and take them here? And that's what I'm going to do. I am not done talking about Deltarune, right? I'm still going to be doing theory review videos. I've got thousands of theories in my inbox. That's not an exaggeration, actual thousands. So I will still be making the theory review videos. And I'll still make a video if I have something to say about an upcoming newsletter or the game itself. If by chance I somehow get some new massive theory, then sure, I'll make a video on it. But as it stands, I don't have much left to say. So today is going to be my last big theory video for a while. In the coming weeks, on top of theory reviews, you'll see new non-Deltarune content that I hope you enjoy. I'm making this announcement so that you guys understand why I'm changing things up. It's truly because I enjoy this channel and you guys and want to share the things I really want to make with you. So I hope you continue to support me. And for the 548 of you that subscribe to Spookyvision in anxious anticipation, thank you, but and so, where do we begin? First off, I'd like to explain what exactly this video is. It is not exactly a straightforward theory where I'm going to say X, Y, and Z is true and that's something that you've never heard of before. I'm going to go through every topic in Deltarune, every story thread, every idea, and try to come to the most logical conclusion. At the end of this video, when I summarize what I ultimately believe, it might be things you already believe, but I think that having this video out there where it kind of covers all of my thoughts on every single thing in Deltarune, is going to be good, because I never really had that for the last, few chapters, and by the time I actually started making videos like that, I had gone off the crack theory deep end, so, this video is that, though. It's an overall, general, it's a theory, and I'm going to say some things you might be actually surprised about, but it is an overall discussion of Deltarune as a whole, and where everything is going. In its most basic form, Deltarune is a story about 3 teenagers adventuring in dark worlds and trying to stop the night from causing the roaring. This is the game's core narrative chunk, if you will, the mission to stop the roaring night. This is still true. The night is going to cause the roaring, as evidenced by the prophecy that openly states this will happen, and while we've been able to banish a titan, we won't be able to banish all of the titans. However, once the roaring happens, we'll be able to do something to quote-unquote save both worlds. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. The Knight is, by all means, the primary antagonist right now. Do I think that this could shift at some point? Absolutely, but as of right now, outside of general vibes, there's no reason to think this. We're chasing the Knight is opening fountains, the roaring will happen, we'll save the worlds by following the end of the prophecy. This is as simple gets, except for the fact that there's several road bumps that derail this so-called simple narrative. Kris is rebelling against us, the player who exists. Forgetting about the still very important question about the existence of the player, Kris actively working with the Knight tells us that there's more going on here than we think. Unless Kris is straight up evil, which is obviously not true, why would they work with this agent of destruction that is trying to cause a world-ending event? Well, this is because, again, as most of you already know, the Knight is December holiday. While there's always the possibility that the Knight is actually Carol or some alternative, the Knight is most likely some kind of December holiday-themed being, whether that's actually just December back, or some kind of zombified December, or a dark spirit of December, whatever it is December. Des is obviously missing, and presumed not to be coming back, but the truth about her disappearance is unknown, at least to most. Asgore is trying to figure out whatever it is he saw back then. What does that mean exactly? While it's true that Asgore being fired from the police force over a Dark World-related incident that nobody in town believes could be completely separate from the disappearance of December Holiday, I think it's safe to say that whatever happened to Des ties in with one of this game's other big narrative chunks, the mystery of what happened with the shelter in the past. Pretty much every character in Hometown who has some big Dark World-themed mystery is tied to the idea that something happened in the past relating to the shelter. December wrote the shelter's code on the inside of her guitar. Carol knew it was in there. Whatever happened in the past is most likely relating to the shelter, specifically because of the way that every character is deathly afraid of it, and how it seems to have been locked up and safely secured for quite some time. Asgore saw something that nobody believes, and he has a black shard, which, while it technically could be a shadow crystal, is also the exact name of the weapon that the Knight uses, tying him further into the mystery. Asgore is also working, presumably, with Carol to try and find Des. Could the disappearance of Des be specifically related to the shelter? It's very possible, and probably likely. Asgore comes to Carol's house regularly, and based on hidden dialogue, it seems he's been collaborating with her to try and solve whatever mystery is going on, meaning we can actually separate these into 2 story chunks. 1, the mystery of what happened with the shelter in the past, and 2, the current day goings-on within the shelter. I'll call this one, for simplicity's sake, the Cult of Carol. No, I don't actually think there's a cult, but Carol does have several characters colluding with her and the Knight to use what is essentially dark magic to achieve some goal, so, I mean, it kind of works to call it a cult, you know? Carol, Kris, and the Knight have been inside the shelter. There's an active dark world inside the shelter. Asgore, like I said, is still searching for Des and has some plan for the near future, obviously Chapter 5 related. So what's up with this? That was a lot of information to take in. Well, I don't think it takes a genius to figure out what's going on here. The simple narrative of the fun gang trying to stop the Roaring Knight is being backed up by a much deeper story that ties into Hometown's history. In the past, something happened to December Holiday, something that relates to falling into whatever layer of reality she's currently in. Is she dead? Not likely. After all, we have evidence that she fell into some kind of second reality layer in which she couldn't find her hand or whatever, most likely meaning either her soul and body split, or she's lost in the code, or she's a goner, whatever. The actual game will come up with some world-building science to explain this. The important thing is that she's basically dead without actually being dead. There is a high chance that Kris feels some amount of responsibility for this, but that's not part of this story chunk. We'll get to that later. Whatever happened with the original incident involving the shelter, I don't think it's as simple as Des wandering in and falling into darkness, like so many people think. That just doesn't make sense considering what we know now about Dark Worlds. For her to write down the code in her guitar, she must have known that there's some reason that the shelter is worth investigating, and/or she's been inside the shelter before, and/or she knew that there's some level of risk entering the shelter, so she wrote the code down in case she got lost. This might seem obvious, but what it tells me is that Des getting lost in darkness is not the root source of the story. Everything wasn't perfectly normal until she one day fell into darkness. For her to even investigate the shelter in the first place, there must have been something or someone else in that town that gave her a reason to do so. Personally, again, without getting too much ahead of myself, I think this is where we'll find our true villain of the game, but we'll get to that later. So, Des is gone, and Asgore witnessed some part of it happening. Nobody believes him, except for Carol. It's worth mentioning there is a chance that Asgore saw something separate to Des's actual disappearance, as it almost seems like he hasn't been inside the shelter. Asgore talking about proving to everyone that what he saw was real doesn't make sense if he has been inside the shelter and knows that the night exists and is December holiday. At that point, he'd either show everyone that the night exists and is Des, or he'd understand, most likely in the same way Kris and Carol do, that there's a much more important goal now, to restore Des back to life, or again, whatever Kris and Carol are doing. Considering Asgore almost seems to be on an outside layer of awareness, not even as much as Kris, I think it's possible that he hasn't seen the inside of the shelter. Regardless, Asgore is working to prove what he saw. Kris and Carol are working together, it's unknown for how long, alongside the Night. Carol is aware that the Night kidnapped Undyne. Carol wants the Dark Worlds to keep opening, and whatever it is that's happening to keep happening, as her plan is seemingly unfolding as expected. Meanwhile, Susie is dead set on saving the world. She's not aware of the Knight's ties to Kris's backstory or Des, and while Ralsei is sort of a mystery at this point as to how much he knows, he also wants to stop the Night in the Roaring, despite his disbelief that we can. There is something that nobody's really talking about, though. Something that kind of throws our understanding of the story into question. Okay, if I go out and say this sentence, which I wholeheartedly believe, the one that's blacked out on the screen right now, you would roll your eyes and not immediately believe me, so let's work our way there. Carol's plan, whatever it is, relies on the soul, right? I mean, the answer is yes, I'm not really asking you. Kris needs the soul to seal the fountains. Only Kris's soul works for some reason. Cough cough, because it's the player. And Carol specifically mentions over the phone that without soul, ... Kris will. This is referencing, as evidenced by the Japanese version of the translation, that Kris needs the soul to seal the fountain. Anyways, Carol's plan requires the soul, right? We agree on that, we shake hands, we formally nod our heads, yes, this is good. Well, because of what we've established, that it's only Kris's soul that can seal the fountains, it's not just the soul that Carol needs. It's us, the player. Carol knows about us. Carol knows about the player. This is a bit harder to prove, however I think it's clear given that the reason only we can seal the fountains is implied to be because of the player and our holy light, and also Carol emphasizing the word you when she tells Kris that you are always welcome here. I think it's clear that she knows we're here and needs us to seal the fountains. Second thing we need to agree on. The only reason the soul is involved in the story whatsoever is because of Gaster. Without Gaster creating whatever device he created, or starting the Gonnermaker process, or summoning us from the void, or whatever combination of words you want to use to describe how he brought us here, without him doing that, the player would not be involved in the story. Now, seeing that we're separating this discussion into chunks like this, Gaster is a topic we're not ready to discuss just yet. However, remember how before the release of chapters 3 and 4, we all thought that there were all these different stories, right? Asgore and the police, December's disappearance, the Night, Ralsei's backstory, Gaster, and they were all these separate little things, and oh, how are they going to come together? Well, then it turns out that all of them are intertwined. I think Gaster is going to end up the same way. While we might think that he's still pretty separate from the main story, I believe he's going to be way more connected to the story than we think right now. Anyways, Gaster is the only reason that the player is here. Therefore, we can combine these two pieces of information to come to a conclusion. Carol Holiday knows Gaster. Or at the very least, knew that she would have the chance to steal us from Gaster in that moment during the intro sequence. She knew that we would end up in Kris, which seems pretty unlikely unless she knew that A, Gaster would summon us and try to put us in a vessel, and B, there would be the opportunity to snatch us in that moment and put us inside Kris. The second speaker in the intro, the one who interrupted Gaster, is Carol Holiday. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for her to have her plan whatsoever. Now, you might not fully agree with this, which is fair considering how definitive of a statement that is. However, I want you to realize that there's really no other likely alternative. Well, there is one other alternative, but we'll get to that in a second. The only way her plan comes to fruition, the only way we can seal the fountains, the only way that Deltarune even works as a story is if the player is inside Kris. Not anyone else, just Kris. So Carol's whole plan, she had to know that Gaster was going to summon us. Now to take the briefest of pauses. There is a question to be asked here. Okay, Spookydood, you might be right, but why wouldn't Carol let us go inside the vessel and have Kris do all the stuff they've already done without damaging their life by inserting the soul into them? Well, I think that's a larger discussion without any clear answer. One interesting idea involves the name of a variable in the code. The name of the variable that displays what chapter you started the game in is called Kris Preservation Society. Now, this is a stretch, and the variable name itself might not mean anything, but considering Kris puts the soul back in even after the Snowgrave route, even after Chapter 4's weird route, and the frequent references to Kris being a zombie, or dead, or a cage with parts, is it possible that Kris needs the soul to live? One possible reason for why this could be that Kris's soul is in use somewhere else, and that they need us to pilot them around. For all we know, the strange physical parallels between Kris and the Knight could be because their original soul is being used to give the Knight the determination it needs to carry out its plan, with our soul piloting Kris around to keep them alive, thus making Carol, Kris, and Des, in a way, the Kris Preservation Society. This is, of course, a brief aside and not meant as part of the theory. It's just important to understand that while there's no clear answer yet, Carol putting Kris in harm's way and being willing to insert the human soul into the body could have plausible explanations outside of straight-up child endangerment. So, moving forward, where does this leave us? Okay, let's look at our character motivations here. Susie and Rousey want to save the world and stop the Knight from causing the roaring. Kris, Carol, and the Knight want something else, most likely finding a way to bring December back, and that requires following Carol's carefully laid out plan. Asgore wants to prove that whatever he claims he saw was real, which most likely is going to be a smaller scale story arc that ends at the end of Chapter 5, with most of the knowledge gained from that just adding more fuel to the Carol storyline. So, who else is there? At the moment, this seems like a pretty solid story. An easy open and shut case, actually. The ending of the prophecy foretells something dramatic, like Kris's death, something that we don't want to happen. We continue battling the Knight until we reach the end of the roaring. In a dramatic moment, when it seems like we might actually win this, Kris sides with the Knight because they want whatever it is they're working towards. Susie feels betrayed, the gang splits up before some kind of big backstory reveal. We come to learn that, in truth, none of these characters are so bad, and we either fulfill the prophecy, including the great tragedy, or we somehow subvert it, saving everyone. Boom, that's Deltarune. Right? Well, no, obviously, not at all, because there's so much more. These aren't the only character motivations worth talking about. December Holiday has her own set of motivations, or more so, had her own set of motivations. She wanted something before her disappearance involving the shelter, though we don't know what. She wrote the code on the inside of her guitar and was seemingly investigating it, but we're just not sure about the details. It's time to talk about him as well. What is Gaster's motivation? What is it that he wants? Gaster is not an unfeeling scientist who is in this purely for the experiment's sake, as some people still manage to think. He absolutely wants something out of this. But what? Well, we do have a little bit to go off of. First off, in the end credits, he specifically says, "Well done, the halfway mark has been attained, but it is still waiting. How much longer now, my Deltarune?" It's worth noting that Gaster uses Deltarune without a space, whereas the legend of Deltarune features a space between them. I think it's clear to me that Gaster wants to create a new future. That is kind of his goal, he stated it plainly on Twitter since the beginning. I think you can read into this quite a bit. Gaster says his Deltarune is still waiting. Is it possible that Gaster's not talking about the computer program when he says this? He's not saying the story is still waiting for you, but instead an actual object of sorts? That there is a Deltarune that exists, it's a thing that he wants to obtain? I'm not saying that device theory is wrong or anything like that, but the Deltarune waiting doesn't make sense considering it's not completed yet. Saying, oh, the Deltarune is waiting when, we're waiting for Deltarune. It's the other way around. Unless there is something called the Deltarune that's waiting for us. Saying it's still waiting makes me think it is an actual obtainable item or object that will bring about Gaster's new future. Regardless, keep that in the back of your mind because it is still quite speculative. Anyways, what is it that Gaster actually wants? Well, we know that at the top of the entire Deltarune world, influencing the Lightner's religion, Lord of the Hammer, Dragon Blazers, and more, is the Prophecy, the story that foretells the heroes battling with the Night and saving the world. You may think Gaster plans on subverting the Prophecy. You may think he wrote the Prophecy. Whatever it is you think, what matters is that as of right now, he wants us to follow the Prophecy. This is proven by the achievements. 4 specific achievements, actually. Complete chapters 1 through 4 without issue. Each of these achievements are given if you complete the chapters. He says that we're doing good at the end of chapter 4. He seems happy with our progress. Even if he originally wanted us inside the body of a vessel, he seems pretty happy with our progress. So then, Gaster's only motivation as of right now is to follow through with the Prophecy? Well, not quite. Because while we don't know his end goal, we do know one thing he specifically seems to not want. There is one way to avoid getting the 4 trophies that say complete the chapter without issue. You do not get these trophies if you get the eggs from any chapter. That, as of right now, is seemingly the only thing that qualifies as an issue in Gaster's eyes. You can get these trophies if you complete the Snowgrave route, meaning Gaster doesn't necessarily see an issue with what we've done so far. It's specifically the egg rooms that are a problem for him. So, what can the egg rooms tell us about Gaster's motivations? Well, this ties back to another story chunk. There is one sort of gray area when it comes to the past. Most secretive references to character backstories are related to December in some way. Asgore's history, Carol's backstory, the falling out of the holidays, the shelter, all of that is somehow tied back to December. But the one thing that's sort of an unknown right now, because it's really only started to have actual development in these most recent chapters, is Kris's backstory. Kris is a very complex character, but there's not really anything to say on it. I haven't watched any Kris backstory discussion videos, nor have I tried making one, because I simply don't think there's enough in the game right now to actually figure out anything of substance beyond the general idea of trauma and blocking out certain memories. What we know is this. Kris has negative feelings about themselves. We know that since they were a kid, they were uncomfortable being a human in a monster's world. Is this because they were uncomfortable with being a human in general, or because they didn't fit in with their family? We don't fully know, but the signs point to it being the latter. Their side of the room is empty, whereas Azrael's side of the room is decorated and features all of his school awards. Despite this, in the Dark World, Kris's side of the room mirrors Azrael's. In Chapter 3, the secret boss, Eram, in the Mantle minigame, talks to Kris a little bit before their fight, taunting them by saying, specifically if you completed the Snowgrave route in Chapter 2, "Part of you is enjoying this, isn't it? The same part of you that enjoyed yesterday, knowing you could say it wasn't really you." After defeating Eram, they say, "There, that's what I wanted to see. Flickering red like pretty little flames. Your eyes can't hide it, Kris. Without play, the knife grows dull." Eram then says we both have work to do and flies off. I think this tells us a lot about Kris, even if it's not meant to be entirely accurate. I do not think that Kris actually enjoyed the weird route, obviously, especially considering how they brought Birdly to the hospital and desperately tried to undo our actions and keep us away from Noelle. But Eram saying that they enjoyed it isn't entirely baseless. I think that Kris might have some history of violence. Without play, the knife grows dull. The way I interpret this line is Eram saying that Kris hasn't been quote-unquote playing for a while. I think that Kris had some violent tendencies or incidents in their past, but they haven't done anything like that for a while. There is actually some evidence to back this idea up. We need to go back to the topic of the egg rooms. Chapter 4's egg room is in some sort of medical facility. We are told that this is not a random room with no basis in reality. The secretary says that they know they're quite small for a secretary, but knockoffs don't have the right to complain. This was a real place. It's not the original hospital, of course, but it is a recreation of it. That original hospital being one that Kris attended. Inside the room with the tree painted on the door, Kris sees the Forgotten Man. They then sketch in what is meant to be a sort of art therapy. They try drawing what they had seen behind the tree. However, they continuously struggle to draw it. They try over and over and over, but the amount of scribbling leads to the final drawing to be covered up. Then they try to paint a tree over top of it, leaving nothing but a simple still life. After all, there wasn't anything to look at in the room besides a single tree. Then they try to wash the graphite off their hands, but still some remains between their fingers, as you can never wash it all away. Another individual in the art therapy room speaks to Kris. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was so into drawing I didn't notice you. Are you here for art club?" "Right. This is where we draw pictures and don't kill each other." Kris was a patient in this hospital. They attended art club, or what is more likely, art therapy. They attempted to draw what they saw behind the tree, but failed to do so. Instead, they just painted a tree over it, as that was all there was to see, after all. Okay, I'd like to pause for a minute to establish exactly how I think this all fits together as story chunks. Kris's backstory is its own thing. What was behind the tree is its own thing that's clearly tied to Kris's backstory. The Forgotten Man is his own thing, disconnected from the tree itself. He seems to be someone, an actual person actually, from Kris's past, as he even shows up in Hometown. Gaster is, on top of all of this, his own thing. All of these things connect, though. The Forgotten Man seems to be helpful. I still think that Valentine's letter was from him, now more than ever. Boy, I wonder if anybody made a video on that. I bet they must be like a genius or something. No, for real though, the Forgotten Man wants to help in some way. Gaster doesn't want us to interact with the Forgotten Man, as he sees him as an issue. Despite being its own thing, whatever Kris saw behind the tree ties into their backstory. The Forgotten Man wants to help them remember, seemingly, what they saw behind the tree. So where is this all going? Okay, this is another thing we cannot say for certain until the next chapter comes out, probably not until even longer after that. What we know is that Kris has some sort of traumatic backstory. They may or may not have had violent tendencies, or even, if you want to go that far with it, killed someone. They saw something behind a tree, something that they don't want to remember or are struggling to remember, something they repressed. There is always the chance that there was no tree, that the tree itself is a representative of Kris repressing what they actually saw. What actually happened? Is this tied to Dessa's disappearance? Is the entirety of Kris's tragic or dark backstory based on what they saw behind the tree? When Eram teases them, are those references to them enjoying violence specifically based on what happened behind the tree? Or did Kris have more than that going on? Did they have violent tendencies before what happened behind the tree? Did Kris see something happen to December behind the tree? Did Azrael see what was behind the tree? Was Kris adopted before or after they saw what happened behind the tree? It's really not known at the moment. We're not sure exactly what was behind the tree or when in the timeline it was there. Whether Kris was adopted before or after art therapy. What they actually did or saw that led them to have to repress these memories. But we know it's something. I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that there's a reason Gaster doesn't want Kris to remember what was behind the tree. I think it's safe to suggest, at the very least, that if Kris were to properly remember what's happening behind the tree, or alternatively, if they were to collect all the eggs, it could risk stopping Gaster's plan. So do we have any room to work with the whole behind the tree storyline? Any ideas as to what could have happened? Yes, actually we do. But this is yet another can of worms. Let's talk about another story chunk. Image Friend. I think the Deltarune fanbase has gone a little bit crazy with Image Friend. Is there a demon cat from hell that kidnaps children in Deltarune? At face value, reading all the evidence provided, yes, it certainly seems that way. If you don't know anything about Image Friend, I recommend watching my own video on the topic where I sort of dive into pretty much everything we know about him. It is a very deep subject. To summarize, though, as quick as possible, Image Friend is the name of a sprite that appeared in Spamton's basement and in an unused Birdly attack, and on this scary cat monster in the beginning of Chapter 3, and in super hidden rooms in the Sword Route, and in Chapter 4. He's sort of all over the place, and his signature laugh is too. Image Friend at first seems like he might not be too important until you dig deeper. Image Friend is tied directly to Noelle's blog posts about the old Cat Petters game she played as a kid where you raise these digital cats made out of circles. The theory that Friend is a cat stems from this. So, okay, Friend is a cat. So what? He'll probably just appear in a future chapters. But there's a lot more here. Image Friend is directly tied to lots of storylines and may or may not be getting set up as the primary antagonist of the game. Across Chapter 4, there are several references within the prophecy to an entity that we should not trust. In Chapter 4, an organic says this line: "The tale which must be followed, the tale that must not be followed." By directly contrasting these two entities, the tale, aka the story or the prophecy, and the tale, T-A-I-L, the game is saying that the tale, T-A-I-L, wants us to possibly work against the prophecy. Another instance of pretty much the exact same thing is later in Chapter 4 when we see two prophecy panels on opposite sides of the room from one another. They'll hear the ring of heaven's call. They'll see the tale of hell take crawl. The tale of hell. What exactly could this mean? Well, there is one more example of a tale in Chapter 4. In the hidden room just before the secret egg room, there are 3 pieces of lore right next to each other. Logic dictates they're all related, right? Well, the first is a prophecy panel with a picture of a house and 2 trees, with the word roots right above it. The NPC next to it, in scrambled up words, says, "Lost where the forest would grow, The children followed the pointed tail. The poor children. The third is an excerpt from some story saying that a fallen star wept, making rivers from its tears, until something grew from the rivers that looked like glass. Obviously, we're not going to be able to put these three pieces of information together as of right now. However, I do think there's a pretty strong argument we can make about Image Friend. If it's true that Image Friend is a cat, specifically a cat from Noelle's game Cat Petters, as evidenced by the circular design of the cats and the tail of hell being made of circles, then we might be able to come to a conclusion about what is going on here. Okay, this is generally what the more hardcore Deltarune fans who know about Image Friend already think, okay? Image Friend is a cat. It is also some kind of darkener that existed long before the story began. He is an agent of evil, an actual antagonist who is seemingly working against the prophecy. He lured children into the woods and is the reason they got lost. He is the tail of hell, the tail that must not be followed, but the pointed tail that the children followed where the forest would grow. December most likely became lost due to Image Friend. So that is, again, the theory that most people seem to kind of believe at the current point in time. I'm not really sure how I feel about this theory. At its core, it is entirely based on 3 out-of-context pieces of dialogue. I know it feels like it's an open and shut case right now, but outside of these 3 pieces of dialogue, outside of the references to the Tale of Hell, we would know literally nothing about Image Friend. Another thing, we don't actually know that much about Image Friend at all. Just because he comes from the Circular Cat game doesn't necessarily mean that he is a cat. Is he even definitively from the Circular Cat game? For all we know, he could take some different shape. His name might not even be Friend, it could be something entirely different. I know it seems like it's obvious, but we can't be so sure. That would be basing a large amount of our understanding of the game's story on assumptions. Here's the thing, so many people thought it was obvious that the Valentine's letter was from Gaster until it turned out that Forgotten Man's characterization in Chapter 3 sort of leads to it being him more than Gaster. For all we know, these 3 references to the Tale of Hell may be going way over our heads. Like, okay, hear me out, this is another pause, not part of my theory or anything. What if it turns out that Gaster is actually a devil-like figure, that he created a sort of new body after being shattered into a million pieces, a body that has a tail? Or maybe Mike the Cat is a shard of Gaster, a split fragment of his personality, leading children to him into the woods, doing his dirty work for him. If that was the case, then everything would be called into question, because all of a sudden Gaster is the tale that must not be followed, and the prophecy, the real prophecy that must be followed, is not what he's having us act out. Do you see how complicated things can get really quickly if Image Friend isn't this cat that everybody thinks? Like, if we start basing a large theory off the idea that Image Friend is an evil cat that lured children into the woods, the second that Deltarune would kind of change that a little bit, it's like, oh, actually Image Friend works for someone else, boom, the whole story is shattered. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily think this is what's happening, but you see how such a simple explanation like Image Friend is not a standalone character in the way that you think, and or he associates with some other character who has their own motivations, would completely shatter the idea that Image Friend is a cat from hell that got Des lost. All I'm saying is, I do think that Friend is important. I do think he'll play a large role in the coming chapters, but for all we know, especially considering how many of him there are, he may not be a standalone character, but instead a servant of someone else. Regardless of how much of a role you think Image Friend played in the origins of the Deltarune story and the disappearance of December, though, it actually kind of doesn't really matter, because whether or not he was involved, it doesn't actually change our understanding of things anyway. Like we previously established, December wanted something. She was investigating the shelter. She put the code in her guitar. She ended up getting lost. Similarly, at some point in time, something happened behind a tree that Kris saw. Okay, so now let's add Image Friend to the mix. Des wanted something, she investigated the shelter, she put the code in her guitar, and something happened behind the tree involving Image Friend. You see what I'm saying? We have absolutely no way to know what Friend's motivations are, what it did, what it wants, what they are. If Friend lured children, plural, into the woods, what does that mean? That multiple children were lost like Des? That multiple children were lured and saw Des disappear? It's way too vague. There's no way to know for sure, so ultimately, as much as Friend is going to play a large role in the story, we can't know for sure what exactly it is right now, and any theory will have a hard time nailing down anything concrete. That being said, our knowledge of Image Friend does prove something I've been trying to explain. That as much as it might seem like we know the general building blocks of the lore, there is absolutely a number of elements that we don't know just yet. Gaster, Friend, the vessel, and more could all drastically shift our understanding of what's happening. There is only one loose idea as to what Image Friend could be responsible for. I know, I just said that it's impossible to know, and it is. I can't say that enough, but there is a very loose idea based on the few lines of dialogue we have. Remember when I said I think there's a chance that there was never something behind the tree? That the references to what Kris saw behind the tree were actually in reference to an event they repressed to the point of being unable to see it without, a tree in front of it? Every time they try to draw it or remember it, all they see is a tree. Well, what if that's what this line means? Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. The poor children. The forest would grow there because there was not a tree there, even if there was supposed to be. This could mean, then, that whatever Kris saw behind the tree was because of Image Friend. And not only that, but whatever they saw behind the tree involved the children being lured by Image Friend. This is, of course, speculation, though, because of how thin the arguments are. So, we've established that there's a lot going on with Kris. We've talked about their backstory, the mystery of that backstory, and what happened behind the tree. We know they're working with Carol in the night, presumably for the same reasons as Carol, but actually there is one more thing to talk about. What are Kris's motivations? Yes, I just said they're helping Carol, but I don't think that's it. After all, in the end of Chapter 4, Carol seems to almost threaten them into continuing to help her. Don't forget, Kris, you promised. Threatening? Maybe. Guilt-tripping them? Definitely seems like it. Kris may have something they want personally, and we actually know what it is. It's the shadow crystals. There is no reason that we, the players, are collecting the shadow crystals. Is there the vague notion that we might be able to achieve a good ending or subvert the prophecy's terrible tragedy by getting the shadow crystals? Sure. But is that very pronounced in any meaningful way outside of little references? No. The person who really wants to collect the shadow crystals is actually Kris. ERAM says this themselves. While they were definitely taunting Kris in regards to them wanting to use their knife and hurt people, they did say, "Is it fun, Kris, playing around like this? That's why you're searching for them, aren't you? The shadow crystals and the shadow mantle that I'm holding. Do you honestly think it'll get you what you want? No. Part of you is just enjoying this, isn't it?" This dialogue tells us two things. Kris wants the shadow crystals because it's fun to play around like this, and in some way they'll help Kris to keep doing so. The other thing it tells us is that Kris might not truly believe that the shadow crystals will give them what they want. So what could this be? Well, I think it's safe to say that Kris has their own motivations separate from Carol and the Knight, to collect the shadow crystals. If we were to take this absolutely literally, as far as we can go, perhaps the reason that Kris wants these shadow crystals is because they are doomed to stop playing around, so to speak. Does that mean the Dark Worlds that will they'll be banished permanently? That Kris thinks the shadow crystals can help them stop it? Does that mean Kris is going to be killed and the shadow crystals will help them stop that? Again, it's all speculation for now. But I do think it's time to talk about the prophecy. But first, yet again, another brief pause. Earlier I said that Carol is the second speaker and interrupted Gaster. Pretty definitive statement. One thing you may be saying is that my suggestion of events is uber complicated, specifically in regards to Carol interrupting Gaster like that. My suggestion that Carol is the second voice would imply that she is working against Gaster. After all, why would she interrupt him and change his plans? And, I mean, even more than that, why is Gaster still okay with how things are happening if he wanted us in the vessel? Well, okay, this is kind of a larger discussion, but there is the... Okay, there's a bit of evidence for this, okay, and I'm going to say this, and you might not believe it, so take this with a grain of salt, but there is the Famitsu magazine, which Toby writes for, Toby Fox, and he does the Q&A in it, and sometimes he does a little other things. There is apparently just releasing an Undertale Deltarune magazine version of it, like a full issue, where the cover is Undertale, because it's the anniversary. And in that, there's sort of an overview of Deltarune. And it wasn't written by Toby, right? But in the beginning and end of the section, Toby Fox writes things in it. So is it, like, for sure that he didn't at least look over it? And the people that wrote the article that kind of talks about Deltarune and all of his characters, they write some interesting things. For example, they write that during the Garnermaker sequence, suddenly, everything is discarded by the very same voice that has been giving instructions, seemingly implying that there is only one voice in the Garnermaker sequence, and that's Gaster. Regardless of whether or not you believe that, take it with a grain of salt, because again, they might not know things, right? It wasn't written by Toby Fox, but again, why would he not look that over? And it's not like it does any... It's not like it's a huge lore drop, it's just... Anyway, even if you don't believe that the magazine is true evidence, there's still always the chance that there really is one speaker in the intro of Deltarune, and that it's Gaster. And that, perhaps, as of right now, right? It seems there's a complete overlap between Carol's motivations and Gaster's motivations. They both want us to continue to fulfill the prophecy. They are both satisfied with the results thus far. Carol had to know about Gaster and had to know about us for this plan to even work in the first place. Is it possible that Carol, Kris, and the Knight are working alongside Dr. Gaster? This, in my opinion, is an underrated theory that you really need to consider. Who else would be able to give Carol and Kris the information they would need to actually enact this plan? How would they know about the true nature of darkness and what needs to be done to save December? Unless, of course, they're working with Gaster. In entry number 17, Gaster asks, "What do you two think?" Perhaps we finally know who he was speaking to. Kris and Carol. These three, alongside the Knight, are working to complete the prophecy, and the plan was always to put the soul into Kris. Maybe when we finally get into the shelter, we'll have a sequence similar to the True Lab where we read through Dr. Gaster's entries, and we actually get to entry number 17, and as it turns out, he truly was working with Carol and Kris. But hey, regardless of whether or not you believe that, it really doesn't matter, as all it affects is whether or not Gaster and Carol have similar motivations or not, and the context behind Carol's plan. So then, let's get back on track and talk about the prophecy. I just wanted to include that in case you were already out when I said that Carol was the second voice. The prophecy is its own story chunk, and as much as it's not a character, it has its own set of motivations, in a sense, or at the very least, instructions. The prophecy is complicated, like everything in this game. At its very core, we know this. Ralsei told Kris and Susie an abridged version of the prophecy. This is because he did not want to reveal too much information to them from the get-go, and also because the prophecy ends with a great tragedy that he wanted to try and avoid. When we arrive in Chapter 4's Dark World, we find out that the prophecy is actually much deeper than Ralsei's original version. To summarize, the heroes will battle with the Knight, who is opening fountains, Lancer, Queen, Tenna, and Asgore were referenced, the heroes are the cage with human soul and parts, the girl with hope crossed on her heart, and the prince alone in deepest dark. The roaring will happen, and the three heroes will be sent to World's Edge. And then when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the worlds, there's only one way. The final prophecy that reveals this way, however, is shattered by Susie. Alright, seems pretty simple. The prophecy is exactly as we expect, and lines up with everyone's character motivations. Carol is making sure the prophecy happens presumably because only at World's Edge, or through the roaring, can Des be brought back. Kris is gathering the shadow crystals in the hopes of finding a way to undo whatever will be done during the end of the game, that final tragedy they want to avoid. There will be a great tragedy that'll act as the one bad ending most of Deltarune will probably be about changing. Right? Seems pretty simple? Well, not exactly. You see, there's several questions about the prophecy we need to discuss. First off, and I know you're going to groan and roll your eyes if you've been on like Deltarune YouTube recently when I say this, the order of the heroes in the prophecy. This is such an annoying discussion to get into because it's one of those things that, like, technically there's enough evidence to be believable, but it's not 100%, and if it was true, it would drastically alter our understanding of the events of Deltarune. So it's like you're bordering on like two different opinions here, both of which are so drastically different and would kind of change everything. So, just hear me out. In the second Dark World section, the one that Susie herself creates, that's where we see the prophecy panels dealing with who the heroes of Deltarune are. That's where we see the cage with human soul and parts, the girl with hope, blah, 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 blah. The problem is that every other prophecy panel in that Dark World is scrambled up and all jumbled. This is a precedent set as soon as we enter the Dark World. As a matter of fact, everything is scrambled up and in the wrong order. So these panels are in this order. The third hero, the prince alone in deepest dark. The first hero, the cage with human soul and parts. And last was the girl. At last was the girl. The girl with hope crossed on her heart. Okay, well, logically we can sort of, sort these into their proper order. The cage, the girl, and prince. But now we have a problem. It starts off by saying, and last was the girl, so unless the original intended order of the prophecy is meant to say the third hero, the first hero, and last, the second hero, which makes no sense, in reality the girl with hope crossed on her heart is not the girl referenced in the line, at last was the girl. That's a fourth character. The first hero, the cage with human soul and parts, the second hero, the girl with hope crossed on her heart, the third hero, the prince alone in deepest dark, and last was the girl, at last was the girl. Okay, but this still doesn't entirely fit, right? Why would they say the girl with hope crossed on her heart, but then, and last was the girl? Like, the prophecy is introducing the concept of there being a girl in Heroes for the first time, even though there already was a girl. The girl doesn't mean a second girl. You understand what I'm saying? This is just so convoluted, and it's like, yes, the argument that the prophecy is mixed up and Susie is not the girl with hope crossed on her heart, good theory, interesting, especially considering there is actually evidence for this. But then you actually get down to the logistics, and it's just so convoluted and complicated, And last was the girl. If you said the cage, the girl, the prince, and then the girl, it's like, what? You already said the girl. You know, if I say it that way, it makes no sense. So, man. Regardless of whether or not you believe this specifically, that the prophecy is out of order and there are actually 4 characters intended to show up rather than 3, the big theory that many still have stands. The intended second hero of the prophecy is not Susie, it's Noelle. Consider, the other part of the prophecy states that love finds its way to the girl. This happens in the weird route. Also, Noelle is able to equip certain swords while Susie is not, which lines up with the prophecy panel. While there may not be antlers in this panel showing the girl, she did wear a hood at a certain point in the story where her role as a hero was alluded to. Therefore, perhaps Noelle is the second hero, not Susie. But this raises a question. If we're not following the prophecy, what exactly is going on? Didn't I literally just say that Carol and Gaster want the prophecy to be followed? Isn't that exactly what our entire theory hinges on, that everyone's cool with following the prophecy until the ending where they have different ideas as to what's going to happen? Well, yes and no. It depends on what you believe. Let's put a pause on this question real quick. We need to pull a classic Spookydood and start talking about something entirely different that makes no sense at first. Sometime around the year 1480, there lived a German man named Johann Georg Faust. He was an alchemist, astrologer, and magician. He was also considered a conman and a heretic by the people of medieval Europe. Exact details about his life are unknown, so much so that there are 2 similarly named individuals in records that could be Faust. Nobody knows for sure, but you've probably heard his name before. That's because after his death, Faust became the subject of a very popular legend, the Legend of Faust. In this fictional story from around 1587 that probably didn't happen to the actual guy, the protagonist, Faust, grows depressed with his life as a scholar. He reaches out to none other than the devil to gain knowledge and powers that'll allow him to have the life he's always wanted to live. The devil's representative, Mephistopheles, appears and bargains with Faust. Faust gets great power for a number of years, but at the end of those years, the devil will acquire Faust's soul and permanently enslave him. Faust takes the deal, and in the earlier versions of the tale, Faust is corrupted and the devil takes him to hell where his deal ends. There were other variations of the story, however, that involved God saving him in the end. Now, maybe you've never heard of Faust, but you most likely have heard of The Little Mermaid, a story in which a girl is dissatisfied with her life, takes a deal with the symbolic devil, and ultimately pays the price, but has a happy ending. This story is clearly based on the Faust story, as are so many other stories, because that's the power of stories. They take real-world observations or ideas like, hey, this guy in medieval Europe is kind of a freak, and they put twists on them. They spread these ideas and observations through imagery, symbolism, and story, in turn inspiring others to make their own versions of the story, carrying with them the same ideas. People essentially gossiping about a strange guy named Faust started a chain of events that led to story after story, snowballing into popular media. When you see so many of these stories with the same general premise of a Faustian deal made with the devil, it's not because everyone's secretly stealing each other's homework, it's because they all link back through the chain of inspirations to what sits at the top, the origin of all these inspired tales, the original story of Faust. One of Deltarune's big themes is about changing a story to make it your own. We see this with the prophecy. In a very similar way to how the Faust story was taken and turned into several offshoot stories, all carrying with them the ideas and themes from the original tale, the prophecy seems to be a story that has been taken and translated into several new versions. Gerson's story, Lord of the Hammer, as he explains during his battle, is very much inspired by the original prophecy. The heroes do battle in chariots to save the queen is based off the line, "The queen's chariot cannot be stopped." This is just one example. You know how so many stories like The Matrix use imagery and symbolism directly lifted from the Bible? In Deltarune, Lord of the Hammer is doing exactly that for the prophecy, which is the Lightworld's version of the Bible, basically. Yes, that's right, the Lightworld's religion is also based on the original prophecy. Where did the original prophecy stem from? Well, we're not sure just yet, but what we do know is that it inspired both the Lord of the Hammer and the Lightner's religion. Many times throughout the game as well, the Spampton Sweepstakes, comparisons have been drawn between Deltarune and the fictional game series inside Deltarune, Dragon Blazers. As we've come to find out, this is because it's not because there's some kind of magic link between the two, it's because Dragon Blazers was inspired by Lord of the Hammer. So you have these layers of obfuscation where stories inspired stories inspired stories. But the problem is to what extent the stories are accurate, we're not entirely sure. Gerson tells Susie that from the Dragon Blazers characters, she is the dragon. This is where we can start to ask questions like, hey, if Susie is supposed to be the dragon, then perhaps that's evidence that she's not the second hero. but this isn't actually usable as evidence because, like, sure, if you want to super read into it, that could be what it means, that Susie's not necessarily the hero, she's the dragon, she's something else. But Gersten also could have said that she's the dragon because of her personality, or dragon-like appearance, or her ability to write the future, or something like that. We don't really know anything about Dragon Blazer's character, the dragon, so Gersten saying that about her doesn't really mean anything. In Chapter 1 of the Lord of the Hammer series, the heroes defeat the king and stop the dragon. That certainly sounds like what happened in Chapter 1. Could that be proof that if Susie's the dragon, she actually wasn't one of the heroes? Furthermore, with all of these stories that inspired stories, how can we be sure that the prophecy we're following is actually the original? Here's what we're looking at. The question is on this, inspiration timeline, where are we? We are either here, as in the original prophecy foretold our exact adventure that we're going on now, or alternatively we could be here, at the very end, following not the original prophecy but a new one created by someone else. The obvious candidate being Gaster. Perhaps this isn't the Deltarune, this is my Deltarune, a new future he came up with on his own. Could that be why the prophecy doesn't exactly line up with what we're doing? Could that be why the heroes don't exactly line up? Or alternatively, could this prophecy we saw in Chapter 4 be Gaster's prophecy and we've never actually seen the original prophecy? Do you see how this could get incredibly confusing? I feel guilty speaking these words out loud because I could just imagine your ears and brain being assaulted by this. So you see, things start off simple. Kris, Carol, and Des are working together to achieve something that requires following the prophecy, at least up until the ending. The fun gang, sans Kris, wants to find a way to save the day, stop the roaring, and subvert the tragedy that'll happen during the prophecy's ending. Gaster wants us to follow the prophecy, with his true goals seemingly relating to his Deltarune, which is waiting for us. But that's obviously not all, and the second you add on these other elements, everything becomes way too complex and confusing. The prophecy may not be as it seems, there's a chance we could be following an altered prophecy, or that the weird route may be a more accurate following of the prophecy, with Noelle playing the role of the second hero and love finding its way to her. Something happened behind the tree that Kris seemingly repressed. It drove them to extreme lows to the point where they attended art therapy, and whatever it was ties into the story at hand. This could be possibly why Des went missing. Speaking of whom, she also wanted to do something, prior to her disappearance related to the shelter that we don't understand. This is like a crazy balancing act. I feel like the fish on that one page of Cat in the Hat, where he's like just so flabbergasted at this. So how can we start to sort through this confusing stuff? Well, I'm going to come out and tell you what I think of the prophecy. Originally, I said that the prophecy might be misinterpreted, that we're not actually following the prophecy, and the second hero is Noelle. I do not believe this is true, but also it's not wrong. You see, let's take a look at the achievements for Deltarune. There are a few interesting achievements, including Ring, Mirror, and Erase. There are many others like these, but I'll stick with these for the example. To get the Mirror achievement, you have to observe yourself in the mirror of your house, or, alternatively, copy a save file. To get Erase, you have to clean the bloodstain in Kris's room, or delete a save file. To get Ring, you have to ring a bell in Chapter 4, or obtain the Thorn Ring. Now you may be saying, what is it about these objectives that are linked? How is ringing the bell tied to the Thorn Ring? And how is erasing the bloodstain like erasing a save file? Well, they're not linked at all. There are simply multiple ways to achieve the trophies. Multiple interpretations as to what is being asked of you. These achievements written in all caps claim that you must observe the duplicate. That is done by looking in the mirror or copying a save file. Clear it away. That is done by erasing a save file or cleaning the bloodstain. No matter what you did, you cleared it away. What I'm trying to say is, I think the prophecy works the same way. Its text can be interpreted in different ways. The girl is either Susie or Noelle. Love finds its way to the girl because of the bond between Susie and Noelle in the pacifist route, or the soul finding its way to Noelle in the weird route. I'm going to suggest that perhaps the weird route isn't following the true prophecy or anything like that. Maybe, just maybe, the prophecy must be followed. The ending is unavoidable, but the weird route is reading the prophecy in a different way. If the pacifist route is cleaning the bloodstain to get the erase achievement, the weird route is erasing a save file to get the achievement. If all we can do is follow the prophecy, perhaps we can do it in a way that wasn't initially expected. That's what I think the deal with the prophecy is. One body of text that can be interpreted in different ways. With that being said, there's one more big topic to discuss. The angel and the player. One of my biggest problems with pre-Chapter 3 theories regarding the player were that the people viewed the player as this sort of distant, all-powerful being that has great importance to the story, but actually doesn't have any connections or ties to the story itself. It's this thing that exists, and the only reason it needs to exist is because it needs to seal the fountains, and that's it. And that always rubbed me the wrong way, because it felt like it was taking what is arguably the most important story thread and chalking it up to, like, I don't know, we're in middle school on a field trip to the Deltarune Museum, and we don't have any meaningful connection to the dinosaur skeletons, but we have to be there to witness it all because our parents signed the field trip forms, you know? Like, what? You're telling me the player is super duper important, but it doesn't really play much of a role in the actual character motivation story stuff. That sounds crazy to me. To me, the player is going to be important, not just in the sense that, wow, there's this being that's been watching us, but in like an, oh, the player is super important and tied to all the other story threads in the same way that December Holiday is. And with chapters 3 and 4, I feel like we've started to see that. First off, as I previously said, the player is necessary for Carol's plan to work. So now, not only are we this thing that Gaster and Kris are aware of, we're super important to the story. Gaster, Carol, Kris, and presumably the Knight all know of our existence. They know what we are in general, even if they don't know that we're like a human being player. What exactly does Carol need us for? Well, we're not sure. But there is more evidence than ever that the player is the angel. Again, I will once again go out there and say I don't necessarily think the player is the eldritch being that the world of Deltarune has always and will always worship. I think that in the same way that the prophecy can be read in multiple ways, the angel is simply a role that someone needs to play, and we're playing that role. Which makes sense until you realize there's an actual depiction of the player and what they look like in the prophecy. Or, I'm sorry, not the player, the angel. So maybe there really is one angel, and it's us, we're this magical eldritch being that was always going to exist. I guess, if Hometown's religion is not so much, like, based on religion, like, in the sense that, oh, there is this angel that's always existed, but instead it's based on a prophecy, this prophecy that will happen, then maybe it actually does make sense for us to have always been the angel. The prophecy that Hometown worshipped foretold our arrival for a long time. Not that we existed in the Deltarune world as, like, a god figure, but the prophecy said that we will come. I do think there's another alternative, and that's Gaster Angel. Okay, hear me out here. Susie thinks that the picture of the angel looks weird in some way. Rousey says that the angel, what to my understanding, it looks like. Susie says, I don't know about that, man. When Kris investigates it, it says that looking at it makes them feel strange, so they stop looking at it. These reactions don't really feel like what the characters would say if the angel was a picture of a normal human. I guess you could argue that that makes sense. Susie could think it's odd that the angel is just a regular human, and Kris could feel uncomfortable because the angel is a human in the same way they were bothered by the library book with humans in it. But it just feels weird. Why did Rousey call the angel an it if it looked like a human? I don't know, this is just one of those things, man. Anyway, I think it's actually safe to suggest that the player is the angel, while there is some room for discussion. So what's the angel's deal? Well, we were able to absolutely demolish my two biggest videos, which hinged on the idea that we are not going to banish the angel. We're going to be banishing the angel's heaven, and the angel is Gaster, meaning we're pulling him into Deltarune. Do you remember those videos? Well, they were 100% entirely false. The angel banished will finally meet with its desire. Now, okay, listen, I'm going to make a weird suggestion. I think that this is a very strange line here. What could this possibly imply? We are going to be banished and meet with our desire? What is our desire? Gaster? We'll have a little tea party with Gaster at the end of time. I mean, that's absolutely my desire, 100%. If that happens, I would meet with my desire, alright? But I don't know if that's everybody's desire. I don't know. The only instance of something being a desire to be finally met with is, well, the Deltarune. How much longer now? My Deltarune. Deltarune is waiting. I think that the desire is the Deltarune, or whatever it is that Gaster says is waiting, whatever that word Deltarune entails. Does this mean that Gaster is the angel, and when he's banished, he'll meet with his Deltarune? Or that we will meet with the Deltarune? If we're the angel, the theory makes less sense because the Deltarune seems to be Gaster's desire, not ours. Regardless, that's all we really have for the angel. There are, of course, a few more things to discuss, things that are simply too vague to give longer than a few sentences. The repeating instances of darkness that seems to have glass-like shape, the Knight having holes in its hand and being made of the same substance the Titans are made of, and the Knight having the image friend laugh, all point to a deeper look at whatever it is that makes the Titans, whatever that glass-like darkness is. Perhaps it ties into the fallen star that made rivers with its tears. After all, it claims that the substance that came from these rivers looked like glass. Could this be the origin story of the Knight? Another thing is ERAM. What is ERAM? What does it mean when it said it had work to do? What was the Knight doing or trying to do tutorial? What is the significance of the she was used up and Kris was used up lines? All of these things will be answered in the coming chapters, and I truly believe there's just not enough evidence to cover it all before then. There's also these Goner characters in Hometown who seem to almost be falling apart as their dialogue gets stranger and more abstract as time goes on. So that's where we're left. This is, in my opinion, the best possible reading of everything in Deltarune and where it's going. To summarize my thoughts, the Fun Gang is trying to stop the Roaring and the Knight. Kris, the Knight, and Carol are secretly working to achieve something else, most likely related to the disappearance of Des. Kris personally is afraid of something coming in the future, something that could stop them from playing around like they've been over the last few days. So they are attempting to gather the Shadow Crystals in the hopes of stopping it. Kris saw something at some point in the past behind a tree, something that they've repressed but which haunts them to this day. Gaster seemingly wants the same thing Carol wants at the moment, for us to follow through with the prophecy. However, his specific motivations seem tied to getting my Deltarune, which is still waiting. Could be as simple as completing the story, could be something more specific, like an item called the Deltarune that we'll have to reach. Gaster specifically doesn't want us to follow up with the Eggman for whatever reason. Either the memory that Kris is trying to repress or the eggs themselves may end up stopping or derailing Gaster's plans. December wanted something involving the shelter prior to her disappearance. After she disappeared, she became the Knight. Image Friend likely played a larger role in whatever happened before her disappearance, possibly even causing it. The player or Gaster, based on your interpretation, is the Angel, and at some point will be banished to meet with their desire. Carol is either the second voice who interrupted Gaster or is working with Gaster outright. Regardless, she has to at least be aware of him. If she's not working with him and is in fact the second voice, then she had to know what he was saying to us to interject mid-sentence. The prophecy ends with some sort of tragedy, a tragedy that, despite saving both worlds, deeply upsets Rouse and Susie. We'll need to try and stop it. There's a high likelihood that Deltarune's repeated references towards a doomed bad ending that we cannot subvert is specifically in reference to the ending of the prophecy, and this tragedy that'll happen that we're trying to stop. Most likely, Deltarune will continue as expected until towards the end of the game. Once we reach the Roaring, that's where everyone's motivations seem to split and go in opposite directions. Carol wants Kris to follow her plan, which Kris also seemingly wants, but they also want whatever they hope the Shadow Crystals does for them, which could lead to some disagreements. Susie and Rouse want to follow the prophecy and save the world, but this will clash with Carol and Kris's goals. Gaster wants who even knows what, but it probably involves his Deltarune. The Tale of Hell and or Image Friend will also have their own stuff going on. All of this combined leads me to think that the end of Deltarune will be some crazy series of events. I think there's a chance that Deltarune ends, but the credits aren't actually the credits, so to speak. It doesn't really end. That yes, the Snowgrave route is separate from the main route, and that after reaching the credits and seeing some crazy backstory stuff, somehow we'll manage to subvert that ending and get a better one. And that, in my opinion, is overall Deltarune. I don't know if I'm going to edit down to this video to the point where this doesn't make sense anymore, but as of right now, we've reached just over an hour in the recording process. I think that this video had to happen, kind of. You know, in the past, I've made those big videos, Deltarune Devil's Heaven and Angel's Hell. And the point of those videos was me saying, you know, hey, I have this theory that, you know, a big line is being misinterpreted, and based on this reading that I can give you based on a handful of facts, here's where all the pieces fall in Deltarune. Here's where everything lines up. Here's the point of Gaster and everything, in December even too. The problem was that it never fully worked, and now it's completely wrong, so why am I even talking about it? They were completely wrong. And what Deltarune's done is sort of say, like, because I was theorizing, right, that like a handful of plot points were going to get resolved before the ending, and the big things were still going to be the big final, you know, plot points, so to speak. You know, you've got the prophecy and what it really means. You've got Gaster and his true goals, and December. And those were the only things that were actually going to matter by the ending of the game. I didn't think that the Knight would matter because, you know, the Knight is sort of this antagonist that is misunderstood in a way, and whatever it wants is probably not as bad as people think. Like, I think it's safe to say right now the Knight doesn't want the Roaring, right? Obviously not. There's a bigger plan here that Carol's got, and specific Dark Worlds have to open. I think it's possible that the Knight's whole thing is just restoring December. And so for that reason, I still don't think that, unless it's like a sad emotional final boss fight where it's like, oh, you've got to fight this sad emotional boss because of a sad emotional reason, even though they're not a bad guy, which, I don't know, I prefer the big crazy Gaster fight. Unless that's what's going on, I still don't think that the Knight is the final boss and the main antagonist. And that's going to, you know, either be Image Friend or Gaster. And so it's sort of like, this is the only thing I can do. I can't make a more specific theory. I just can't, because everything is so vague, right? Everything, all the story threads are connected. All the story threads have so many mysteries to them. I think that Chapter 5 will reveal a little, but not a lot. I really think it's going to be Chapter 6 and 7 that finally unveil everything. And I think they're going to be a little longer than we expect and kind of go all into detail on the backstory and stuff. I don't know how much Chapter 5 could really do considering it's just Asgore in the flower shop, to answer a lot of these questions. Maybe the Eggman will have a little bit more on. Maybe the secret boss will give us something, but besides that, I'm not sure. So that was this video. That was Spookydood's final theory. Is it correct? I imagine this one's going to be 90% correct by the end of the day. Maybe 80% if I'm wrong about some things, because it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't like you're all misreading this line. It was just a general taking every single theory, every single story thread, every single arc, and saying, okay, here's where I think it's going. Here's where I think we can logically deduce, you know, based on what we have. So I think a lot of people, I don't want you to think that, like, this is a summary of events, right? I don't want you to be, oh, it's a summary, it's not a theory. It is a theory, right? A lot of these ideas, working in tandem together, that's sort of where the theory part of it comes in my opinion. I couldn't make anything else, right? I wrote scripts for things like origin theory, the idea that everything in the game is somehow tied back to Dragon Blazers and Lord of the Hammer and the original prophecy, and it's layers and layers of storytelling. It's just, it didn't mean anything, you know, and it required so much assumption, and I don't like that. I personally hope, if you're still listening to this, because I'm rambling on, I appreciate that. I'm done with the video now, no more Deltarune for a while. Yeah, I am going to be doing some different kinds of videos. You know, recently I watched this YouTube video. I mean, I love the idea of making things and putting it out there. If I knew for an absolute fact that I was going to get the same views on anything I put out, right, I would be making the craziest stuff. Like, I would go film in real life for stuff, you know what I mean? Before I did this channel, there were several channels, right? None of them ever did very well or anything, but once I filmed this video where I sat and I watched this old 50s sci-fi movie, and I thought it was very funny, and it had crazy effects, and I filmed this effect where I went and laid down in my backyard and swapped my body with a skeleton randomly, which is how they did that same effect in the movie. And I mean, this was like, oh God, like 6-7 years ago. No, do not put the meme, do not. I was being genuine there, I forgot. Anyway, no, this was like a long time ago. I wouldn't do something this stupid now, but I had so much fun with it, and I edited it, and part of it was black and white, and I was like, man, I'm really passionate about this. But, like, that would not do well. You know what I mean? I can't go do that. I have lots of ideas for videos, right? You know, there's a part of me that just wants to put things out there. Like, I'm going to Halloween Horror Nights soon, and as an enjoyer of themed events and themed attractions, the idea of just 10 different themed haunted houses, like, I'd love to do a video on that, man. I'd love to do a video and tell you my thoughts on all of them and go into the details and, like, oh, the storytelling of this one was blah, 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 blah. But you guys wouldn't watch that, you know? The same numbers that I'm getting on the Deltarune wouldn't get on that. So it took me a while to try and figure out what I wanted to do. Originally, I wanted to do the Spooky Vision channel, which was horror, and it was like, I had Five Nights at Freddy's videos that I actually wrote and recorded, but it just was, and I don't mean this in a mean way or like an I'm a businessman and I like money way, but it didn't have the soul that these videos do, where I listened to my Five Nights at Freddy's video, and it was so matter of fact, and it was so like, I don't want to be the guy that recaps things. I don't want to be the guy that's like goes and just posts about things because I have to post about things. And so I don't want to give you guys Deltarune videos nonstop when I don't have that passion for them. Do I have the passion about the game? Yeah. And the second a newsletter comes out, maybe I'll do a video. But it's just, I don't have enough to say about the story to keep doing theory videos. So, you know, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some different kind of videos. Recently, I watched a video by this guy who did this, like, Incredibles theory that, like, Jack was some, you know, Homelander clone from another movie, and I clicked on it thinking this is stupid, and that guy made it so entertaining. I was like, man, I would love to make videos like this that weren't all Deltarune related. So maybe you'll see things like that, right? Maybe you'll see, I want to keep doing theories, I want to keep doing analytical content, but it's not going to be Deltarune. So I hope you look forward to it. I hope you still subscribe. If you do have theories, because I'm still doing theory reviews, make sure to send them to spookydoodtheories@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. Please like and leave a comment about what you think about my overall thoughts of the game, and I will see you next time.